Hey, and welcome to Fart Notes, the show where I read books for you and tell you about them. We're starting off with Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire. You might be wondering why this book naked as hell. I got it off Thrift Books for like $4. Anyway, I'm Isadora. Like, comment, subscribe if you're into this. I'm gonna dedicate an entire video right now to chapter 1 of Interview with a Vampire. Something I've seen, especially since the show came out, is like a lot of fans of the show looking at like the 45 book series Anne Rice created involving like vampires in Atlantis and then being like, I ain't reading all that, which like, fair. I have a lot of respect for Anne Rice as an author, but there are many reasons why you may not want to engage with the source material. Yeah, but anyway, I'm engaging with it for you. I'm gonna take that psychic damage, at least in the beginning of the series. I think they're incredibly written books, but, we're gonna talk about some things, so let's fucking go. Interview with a Vampire, a novel by Anne Rice. Also, this is, a Sephora lipstick that I got when it was discontinued and they were trying to get rid of them. This is gonna go all over my teeth, all over my nose, probably all over you. By the end of this shit, if you see purple shit on my teeth, no you didn't, alright? Focus on the tiny pumpkin. Focus on what matters, you know? Anyway, so I'm gonna read to you the very first paragraph. It begins, which like this whole thing, which changed the entire like literary world forever and like kind of reinvented like the vampire in the 20th century. This came out in 76. We start with, "I see," said the vampire thoughtfully, and slowly he walked across the room towards the window. For a long time he stood there against the dim light from Divisadero Street and the passing beams of traffic. The boy could see the furnishings of the room more clearly now. The round oak table, the chairs, a wash basin hung on one wall with a mirror. He set his briefcase on the table and waited. Now, I gotta be honest with you, I made fucking notes and shit in this book, alright? I marked it up. I got my bone pen. I got this fucking bone pen. Okay, I got my fucking highlighter. The way Anne Rice, it's like incredibly sensual, the way she writes. It's like settling into a warm bath. Like literally on this first page, I forgot to even take notes because I was already engrossed in this. But we get into some things which she in the first chapter, she already be activating that fight or flight in me. So in this chapter, just like to break it down for you, basically, we kind of get how Louis de Pointe went from being a human to being a vampire in the first chapter. He talks to the boy, he talks to Lestat. It's very interesting. In all of the adaptations I've seen of Interview with a Vampire, it totally leaves out that Lestat showed up in New Orleans with his aging father, who he has a very complicated relationship with. And he's like taking care of him. But we learn a lot about like where Louis came from, like his enjoyment of the plantations in like Louisiana, and how like all of that kind of comes at the expense of his slaves. So one thing we get into right from the start, it's a very interesting thing, is that of like a slave owner becoming a vampire. I don't think Anne Rice wrote this in a woke way, because we'll get into it. Like, oh my god. No. But again, there is something to be said about writing like period accurate, and I do believe this is how like a white European man like ostensibly would have thought about like women and like black people back in this time period. But like it just kind of, I noticed that a lot. I think sometimes that very often actually vampires are used as like metaphors for different like social issues and different things, even if the author didn't intend it. Like even when you go back to Bram Stoker's Dracula, like the reason why Dracula has a lot of the characteristics that he has is he's like a representation of like Western Europe being scared of like Jews and Eastern Europeans. But oh, here we get into this first thing I've like annotated and highlighted, and it says insanely evocative and a pure banger. This is where she describes like what Louis looks like as a vampire, all right? And he basically says like, I'm gonna read some lines that I really, really like, okay? So I'm a writer, kind of, whatever, don't worry about it, it's not your problem. The vampire was utterly white and smooth, as if he were sculpted from bleached bone, and his face was seemingly inanimate as a statue, except for two brilliant green eyes that looked down at the boy intently like flames in a skull. That goes hard as hell, okay? Like, honestly, I think she really kind of put in place like what the modern Gothic would be. Like, she defined like the modern Gothic with all of these things. And again, like, there are many criticisms we can make of her. I think a lot of so I read I think like the first 4 or 5 of the books in the Vampire Chronicles when I was like 9 to 12. I have that on Vampire Autism, thanks to Anne Rice, for real. Yeah, and like I stopped reading them because I thought it got wildly dumb, honestly. I remember, maybe it was like related to like the Blackwood family. Again, I'm 33 now. I read these when I was like in elementary school. I think I got to a chapter where Lestat blew up a helicopter with his mind, and I was like, I'm like 11 and I reject this. This is dumb. But interview, banger. Like, I think, again, like, I could see there's a lot of reasons, especially the racism, why you might not want to engage with this at all. But that's why I'm doing it for you, how I'm here for you. Then we get down the page. This is where on page 4, we get the line, don't be afraid, just start the tape. Which is one of the best episodes of television also ever created. And I literally just highlighted it and I wrote in with my bone pen, I'm so hard. This is fart notes, all right? Like, if you want, like, I mean, I'll do like some real intellectual shit sometimes by accident. If you can hear the police coming, they ain't coming for me, so we're gonna keep going, all right? So again, we're kind of setting up like the dynamic also really, really well in these pages of like interviewer, interviewee, and how like the boy who we will later learn is Daniel Malloy, my beloved. But we're setting up this very like he's entranced and like enraptured by like the vibe and the look of this other man. We get into shit that's like, this book is just dripping with gayness, honestly. Like, I've heard that, like, one of my friends, she was like, yeah, like, I knew these Mormon women, and, like, their favorite book was Interview with a Vampire, and they didn't think it was gay at all, and I'm just like, damn, like, how many times would I have to bash my head on a rock to, like, attain that level of, like, reading non-comprehension? Like... Anyway, so on page 5, we start learning about like Louis' past for real. So like his family received a land grant and settled 2 indigo plantations on the Mississippi, very near New Orleans. And here we kind of start to settle that like, it's very interesting that Anne Rice seemed to like hate Daniel Malloy and totally discard him, because she does kind of set him up as like a very intelligent and thoughtful person. Like throughout this interview, like, even on this page, he kind of noted, like, Louis' accent and, like, his affect and way of speaking, which, like, you know, we're dealing with somebody who is, like, aware and does have, like, great opportunity to be interesting and, like, how he interacts within the world. And then Anne Rice was just like, fuck your kids. Like, fuck them kids. Like, I don't know. Yeah, they exchange, like, it almost feels, like, flirtatious. We see, like, the boy flustered, and like he actually makes Louis laugh. So we're kind of setting up Louis as like this very cold, aloof, mysterious, very like downtrodden and sad type individual. And like Daniel makes his ass laugh. Like, so we're looking at somebody who like is charming, who is intelligent, who is coming with the comic timing. And it's a very cool dynamic to see, like, these characters feel like very fleshed out already, and like we're only on page 5, which is like a testament to Anne Rice's abilities as a writer for sure. Yeah, so then we get down to, I was talking about the plantations. They had a great deal to do with it, really, my becoming a vampire. That's very cool. Like, the idea of a plantation owner who benefits from slave owners and who, like, brutalizes and uses the bodies of others for, like, his sustenance and for making a living, all right? Becoming a vampire. This is just a cool line, and I like to see it in there. Like, even if Anne Rice was, like, particularly aware of those, like, kinds of connotations or not, I wrote here, Karl Marx would love to see a slave owner be a vampire. Because if you think about it, like, the top capitalists are just vampires. All right, look, you signed into, like, the Mohawk, purple lipstick, vintage juicy couture ass, interview with a vampire reading, all right? You know what you did. I got fucking Halloween nails. Like, this is a ghost. Like, you know the business, okay? All right, so then we actually get a really, really good build-up and, like, fully fleshed out relationship between Louis and his crazy brother, which, Paul, which, like, actually was set up in the television show of Interview with a Vampire. Again, like, I don't really remember, in almost any adaptations, I've never really seen, like, the family relationships of Louis and Lestat outside of each other really be illustrated. But in this, I think his brother is actually a really, really cool tool to show, like, Louis's own ego. So it's like, he's kind of like the king of, like, a self-serving sadness. Like, have you ever listened to the song Caligula by Them Crooked Vultures? Like, there's this one line, I'm a sensitive soul, is just, a sensitive soul is just a tyrant who enslaves all those around them to make certain he is hurt. Always. Go stan, Caligula. Best song in the world. If you like Interview with a Vampire, you would love the Caligula song vibes. I'm just putting it out there. Anyway, so we kind of get into this. Here's another thing that I highlighted to really show, like, kind of like the closeness of them, and how Louis kind of has this thing where, like, he is never happy about anything, like, even as a man. So he was like, this is Louis talking about his relationship with his brother, and he says, sometimes in the evening I would go out to him and find him in the garden near the oratory, sitting absolutely composed on a stone bench there, and I'd tell him my troubles, the difficulties I had with my slaves, how I distrusted the overseer, or the weather, or my brokers. And I put in my notes, world's smallest violin for the slave owner. Mwah, 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 mwah. I'm gonna, let's note from current me to editing homie. Give me Mr. Krabs small violin vibes. Put in the meme. Got you. So we really kind of set up this relationship where, like, first Louis really liked his brother because he was kind of like, even though he could tell that he had, like, this strange religious fervor and, like, was getting in kind of too deep with it, he was like, as long as he listens to my problems, I don't care. Like, he can be in there, like, self-flagellating, you know? But here we get into it. So basically, he began to believe that he was, like, a saint and, like, God was speaking to him, and he said that Louis needed to sell all of his plantations, sell everything he owned, and, like, use it to support him in, like, his religious shit, you know what I'm saying? And Louis basically just, like, laughs at him, and he and the boy go back and forth talking about, like, why did this really bother Louis so much? Like, why couldn't he believe his brother? And Louis, so he displays, like, kind of like this really frustrating, like, masturbatory self-awareness where he will be like, I'm being an asshole, but, like, I'm not gonna do anything about it. So this is all really well, like, established within the first chapter to see kind of, like, the, like, psychic prisons the characters trap themselves within, which I feel like is kind of like the true horror of existing for an eternity, for sure. But, so like the boy is like, yeah, but I could understand why you didn't believe him. Like, if somebody randomly told me that, like, they were, like, being spoken to by God, I would also think they were crazy. And Louis was like, no, but I was Catholic. I did all the Catholic shit. I believed in all this. I think I would have believed it if it was somebody else, but I could never believe that my brother was doing this. I think perhaps it was vicious egotism. And in my notes, I said, yeah, establishing Louis as petty and a dick, but somewhat self-aware early on. It's very real. Then pretty much we get onto page 9, where like, this is, I don't know, should I just read this to you? Are you into a story time? I don't fucking know. Anyway, so basically I'm at one point, like things, of course, grow more tense and more miserable between Louis and his brother Paul, because Paul is like, I'm being spoken to by God, do these things for me. And Louis is like, hell no, brother. Like, but so here he says, you know, I was a Catholic. I believed in saints. I lit tapers before their marble statues in churches. I knew their pictures, their symbols, their names, but I couldn't believe my brother. Not only did I not believe he saw visions, I couldn't entertain the notion for a moment. Now, why? Because he was my brother. Holy he might be, peculiar most definitely. But Francis of Assisi? No, not my brother. No brother of mine could be such. That is egotism, do you see? Also, it's like self-loathing of like yourself and like anything related to you, which very Louis, very consistent with this like nascent, or is it nascent? Bro, English sucks, dude. On page 9, I just have like peak gothic horror events, and it essentially goes into like the events where so basically Louis and his brother, it all comes to a fever pitch where like they have this like disagreement, and immediately after they have the disagreement, like Paul leaves and he like falls down like the big stairs of their imposing plantation manor and like dies, and like everybody thinks that like he did it for some reason, which like I guess they're like, oh, like you had like a bitter argument and then he died instantly, so like it's your fault, even though like nobody saw Louis push him or anything. And here's where we really see kind of like the peak gothic horror events like really begin. Like this belief that Louis is something like otherworldly and like involved with something like devilish or evil is kind of decided for him by all of the people around him before he really even did anything. And it kind of seeds from like his initial doubt in like God speaking to his brother, which is like, this is like a very like Catholic guilt book. You know what I mean? Which is, again, like very gothic horror. Like Catholicism is like very gothic, very bloody, very BDSM oriented, in my opinion. Don't tell the Pope I said that, though. Don't tell the head father that I am whatever. Anyway, the funeral, like, his mother is basically telling everybody that something horrible happened in his room that he wouldn't reveal. Like, the police questioned him because his mother told them to do it. Like, he even felt like he killed him. Like, look, like, so I felt that I'd killed him. I sat in the parlor beside his coffin for 2 days thinking, I have killed him. I stared at his face until spots appeared before my eyes and I nearly fainted. The back of his skull had been shattered on the pavement and his head was the wrong shape on the pillow. I forced myself to stare at it, to study it simply because I could hardly endure the pain and the smell of decay, and I was tempted over and over to try and open his eyes. All of these were mad thoughts, mad impulses. The main thought was, I had laughed at him. I had not believed him. I had not been kind to him. He had fallen because of me. Now, a literary device that's really cool is when you have like a world, like outsider being brought into the world to represent the audience. And like Daniel is kind of the audience's stand-in in this world. And like here he goes, this really happened, didn't it? The boy whispered. You're telling me something that's true. And like, this is how that like the readers are supposed to feel as well. Very excellently done. Because you do, this is like very seductive. Like, I believe I'm in the series. Louis says, you know, let the tale seduce you. Like, honestly, nothing. I think they really, in the first 2 seasons, they did a really incredible job of kind of replicating, like, visually the way Anne Rice writes, which is almost like kind of like sucking you into a warm bath slowly, but like the warm bath is full of like shattered skulls and corpses. Yeah, so here in my notes, I just have stunning gothic detail, and it talks about like the dreams Louis was having, like out of like guilt and madness. Again, like dreams is like omens, is like portents of doom, is like ways of expressing guilt, very high gothic. Then here, I just gotta read this to you because literally my only note is a banger, okay? And it says, I lived like a man who wanted to die, but who had no courage to do it himself. Ugh. Like, this is why I gotta annotate this book with a bone pen, because I'm rock hard. Yeah, so then there's like this very interesting thing where like Louis has a conversation with a priest, and like he's like, no, like your brother was actually talking to the devil. Like he wasn't like talking to God. He wasn't holy, and you didn't kill him, and like you were right to reject him. But of course, Louis does not accept the fact, or not the fact, but like, is my brother divine? Absolutely not. Is he talking to the devil? No. I'm gonna leave that in. Anyway, you know, nothing works for him. So then there's a very interesting where like, yeah, your brother was possessed of the devil, and he says that the father talks to him about how like the devil was rampant. The entire country of France was under the influence of the devil, and the revolution had been his greatest triumph. Now, like, I feel like that's really interesting because we're going back into like the very like core of like Christianity and Catholicism, where like the main sin of like the devil was essentially kind of like standing up for himself, which is illegal. And here we kind of see that's kind of why I think like Nietzsche talks a lot about like Catholicism and Christianity as kind of like a whipping boy religion, like this idea that like the more you suffer, the better you are, and like you're just supposed to take your like oppression. And like he talks a lot about religion like as like a tool of like oppression, and like making the like kind of like supplicating the oppressed and stuff like that. And here we have like the recurring theme of progress is evil, which is very interesting. So like any kind of progress, any kind of upsetting the natural order is evil, which is actually one of like the things that like vampires served in early lore. Like they're kind of a representation of what happens when you interrupt or go against like the natural order of like birth and death. Then we have at the bottom of page 11 where I annotated, and I start picking a fight with Louis. He tells Daniel, and he says, people who cease to believe in God or goodness altogether still believe in the devil. I don't know why. And I just wrote, I disagree. Because I think Louis is really like speaking for himself. Like, so Louis is kind of coming from this place where like goodness inherently does not exist, and like everything is evil and miserable, and there's like no joy to be found in anything. So like, yeah, I think that's just you, dog. Like, bro needed some SSRIs. Hardcore. I used to be like that. I used to think I was like really intellectual and like smarter than everybody because I was just like heinously miserable all the time, and it turned it out I just needed SSRIs, baby girl. Anyway, on to page 12. Yeah, he says evil is always possible and goodness is eternally difficult. No, it's not, homie. Like, that's just you, all right? I mean, I know, like, in, like, back in the day in France, they didn't have, like, Prozac, you know? But, like, back in the day in, like, early New Orleans, there was, like, no Prozac. But, yeah, so then, he goes into talking about how, like, he met up with, like, Lestat finally, who found him, and he kind of thinks that, like, the only reason that Lestat was fucking with him is because he wanted Pointe, my plantation, which I think is really cool, because we have, like, layers of vampirism occurring here. You know, we have, like, Louis as a slave owner being a vampire who's kind of, like, cannibalizing the bodies of, like, Africans for his will, but he draws the line at, like, literally killing people, kind of, which is very interesting. But again, I think that's just, like, the old world, like, Eurocentric, like, morality coming through, you know? Then we have Lestat, and he's like, Lestat was not only, like, a literal vampire, but he was also just trying to sponge off of the shit I had. So, like, many layers of vampirism here. Louis gets into, like, describing Lestat, and it's very fascinating to me. So he says, like, what I mean is the moment I saw him, saw his extraordinary aura, and knew him to be no creature I had ever known, I was reduced to nothing. That ego, which could not accept the presence of an extraordinary human being in its midst, was crushed. Which is very interesting, because, again, Louis is talking about, so, like, if you're going in, when I talk about certain things, I'm not saying that I agree with them or I feel this way. I'm just talking about, like, the universe Anne Rice is building and the logic of the universe. So, like, we have Louis as a person automatically who cannot believe in the presence of God. But if vampires are evil, he, like, can believe instantly in the presence of evil, which he always talked about. You know, goodness is eternally difficult. Evil is always possible. SSRIs for you. Maybe some CBT, because he seems like the kind of simple man who would benefit from some CBT. And by that, I mean, not the, I mean, like, the Mads Mikkelsen in James Bond CBT, okay? I don't mean, like, whatever the fuck they do with the worksheets. Anyway. Yeah, so, like, here also, like, one thing you could also talk about is, like, love as the surrender of the ego. So, like, Louis was never able to, like, surrender his ego, surrender his petty problems, like, focus on anything outside of himself. And, like, you could look at this as, like, kind of, like, a form of love being developed. And, we'll get on. I believe Daniel even agrees with me. He describes, like, also being turned into a vampire as, like, I can't tell you exactly any more than I could tell you exactly what is the experience of sex if you've never had it. So, like, we have a lot, yeah, in my notes, I put the history of vampirism as a metaphor for sex strikes again. Yeah. But Louis is, of course, so he's like, I was so enchanted by him, but I also hated him, which is, like, super real. I feel like that's just, like, the gay experience. Like, do I want to be this person? Do I want to, like, kill them? I think that's more if, like, you're not, like, comfortable in your own, like, same-sex attraction or, like, your homosexuality or, like, whether you're bisexual, whatever kind of, like, queer you are. I feel like if you're not fully ready to embrace that, people who, like, make you feel that make you, like, angry, which I think is part of, I think if more men were comfortable just, like, doing butt stuff, we wouldn't have fascism, personally. But, I'm not a scholar, so, anyway. So then he goes, as I told you, this vampire Lestat wanted the plantation. And then he also describes Lestat as not a very discriminating person. And I'm like, yeah, like, what did I put? I said, yeah, Lestat be popping out babies like a gumball machine. Real. Oh wait, and here I just have, in my notes, holy shit, that's fucked. And it's, so basically I'm in part of, like, Louis' process of becoming a vampire. So he describes it as, like, sexual, consuming, overwhelming, sensual, like a surrender of ego akin to love. But he also says that, it didn't consist of one step because there were several acts. And the first one was to watch the death of the overseer. So, like, Lestat was like, so Lestat's like, I'm gonna kill this man and you have to watch so I can see your dedication to the craft, homie. And I'm just like, damn, I mean, I guess that's the kind of hazing shit that, like, fraternities do. So, like, you know. But, so Lestat took him in his sleep. I was supposed to watch and approve, that is, to witness the taking of a human life as proof of my commitment and part of my change. Again, Lestat took him very sexual ways of like describing the act of murder. This is a fascinatingly weird book. Like, all right. So then we kind of get into on page 15, we're like really establishing the differences between Louis and Lestat. And like, again, like we're seeing Lestat as being filtered through Louis, who is like a queen hater and like super into like an egotistical masturbatory suffering. So like, he's saying that like the main difference from them is that like he became sick from seeing the overseer's body and it caused him nausea, and that like Lestat was like laughing and saying like, oh, you'll get over it, buddy. And Louis is like, I never laugh at death, no matter how often and regularly I am the cause of it. Yeah. So I said one thing, there's this movie from the 30s, I think, called Dracula's Daughter, and it's kind of one of the first depictions in Western media of like the sad, guilty vampire murderer who like struggles with their impulses. And I really see like that really inspired Anne Rice, and I really see kind of like the Dracula's Daughter type shit happening in here, you know? Anyway, then we get into like, I don't know if I can even read this on YouTube without upsetting it, but we get like a very like sexual undertones kind of description of like them killing and beating the overseers, which again, like, okay, so you're vampires, like you gotta eat from people, but you're also like beating the body, bruising the face and shoulders to hide what was done to it and make it look like he was like, you know, taken out by other people, like, or robbed. Yeah, so you're saying Lestat, so he's talking about, so as he's watching Lestat beat the shit out of this dead body, Louis is like, Lestat was no more human to me than a biblical angel. Okay. Yeah, so then I was saying, so like, all right, so, but then he's saying like, the pressure of like becoming a vampire is kind of straining his enchantment with Lestat. And he said, you know, I had seen my becoming a vampire in two lights. The first light was simply enchantment. Lestat had overwhelmed me on my deathbed. But the other light was my wish for self-destruction, my desire to be thoroughly damned. And in my notes I said, a proper BDSM relationship would heal all Catholics. Amen. What is it? Think on it. Oh my god, then we get back to Louis, like, whining about shit. He's like, this is unbearable. I want to die. You have it in your power to kill me. Let me die. And I refuse to look at him, to be spellbound by the sheer beauty of his appearance. And I'm like, girl, like, you wanted to hit that man so bad. Like, you were dick whipped instantaneously, all right? Yeah, then we get into, like, I don't know, again, like, the way she describes the atmosphere, this is something that I can just not convey to you. Like, you need to read it and be in it, okay? If you want to, like, get this atmosphere. The way she describes New Orleans, it's just, like, so sensual, so beautiful. She's, like, describing his, like, rotting, like, dilapidated, like, plantation manor, and it's just, like, so sensual and beautiful, like, like, the Louisiana heat and damp were already picking apart the steps. Every crevice was sprouting grass and even small wildflowers. That is so deliciously gothic. Like, yeah, and on page 16, we get Louis's name for the first time. And the boy gasps when he learns it. Yeah, then we so he's, like, laying down on the steps where his brother had died. And then we get into, like, all right, so this is where I'm really starting to question, like, all the people who never thought Louis and Lestat were, like, fruity, all right? Like, this is giving, like, un licuado de maracuya, okay? Un, like, mariconcha. Let's think about it, all right? So, so as Louis laying on the steps where his brother had died in his, like, rotting manor, Lestat speaks to him and he says, now listen to me, Louis, he said. And he lay down beside me now on the steps, his movements so graceful and so personal that at once it made me think of a lover. Real. Okay. Yeah, so here we kind of get back into like a dominance and submission, like punishment and progress. So like Lestat's like, so they kind of have like a little struggle before Lestat finishes turning him into a vampire. And Louis says, as soon as I stopped my abortive attempt at rebellion, he sank his teeth into my neck. Hot, first of all. And in my notes, I say lots of rebellion versus submission and good versus evil. Okay, Anne. Then I just have a section I highlighted and all the notes I said. It says fucking gay, bro. It says, listen, keep your eyes wide, Lestat whispered to me, his lips moving against my neck. I remember the movement of his lips raised the hair all over my body, sent a shock of sensation through my body that was not unlike the pleasure of passion. How many times have we compared, like, vampiric activities to sex and we're already on page 17? Like, yeah, then we're going further. I highlighted it. It says, I drank, sucking the blood out of the holes, experiencing for the first time since infancy the special pleasure of sucking nourishment. So we have a lot of things that I feel like come up a lot through like Anne Rice's novels already put in thematically here. We have like, kind of like, what did I put in here? Birth and death, Lestat as mommy, book exquisitely balances opposing forces on every page. So like, what goes through my mind, brother? I hope you can't hear those MMs be talking in my hallway, but like, it'd be like that sometimes. Yeah, so like, again, like, there's like kind of like a weird incest that like vampires can often imply, which Anne Rice later does more than imply. There's like birth and death. There's just like a lot of taboos all coming together in this book being like represented and explored through vampirism. I've seen people online talk about how vampirism in Anne Rice's world is like a metaphor for SA. Hate that I have to do that. Shit, I only read chapter 1. It's cool. When I ordered from Thrift Books, it came with this free bookmark, so that's pretty sick. Yeah. So now we kind of get to the conclusion of the turning, where Louis says, and now I saw him filled with his own life and own blood. He was radiant, not luminous. And I was like, yeah, exchange of fluids and ecstasy. Where have we seen these things before, my dears? Then I just have, it says, a banger. We have, I heard the night as if it were a chorus of whispering women, all beckoning me to their breasts. Yeah, so this book, honestly, like, it's kind of interesting to me that these books were written by a woman. We already have a very interesting line where it was like, my sister pretended to be hysterical after my brother died, not because she really was, but just because, like, that's what she thought women are supposed to do. And I'm like, we kind of have these, like, two men kind of like just like killing and murdering and abusing everybody around them, and like everybody's a background character except for these two white men. We already have some like kind of weird stuff, like just like the sexualization and like lack of personality of women. I mean, that's still a banger of a line and I respect it, but I'm like, I think we can really tell that like Anne Rice she wasn't for the bitches in the manner that I am. She's kind of more on like that Akon shit of like, I'm trying to find the words to describe this girl without being disrespectful. Yeah. But she's not even aware that she's like disrespectful. Maybe Akon was more woke than Anne Rice because at least he like, I don't know. Why am I talking about Akon? Like it's fucking Shakespeare. But I think like Shakespeare was kind of like the Akon of his day if you like think about it. Anyway. So then we get, this is one of my favorite exchanges between Louis and Lestat, where like Lestat pretty much immediately goes into like Louis's papers and like private like shit, and he's like, you're a rich man, he said to me when I came in. Something's happening to me, I shouted. So like Louis is having this total breakdown about like the change and the transformation of like humanity to vampirism. And Lestat's just fucking vibing. He's like going through his papers. He's like, hell yeah, I have a rich husband. He's like, so Lestat says, you're dying, that's all. Don't be a fool. Don't you have any oil lamps? All this money and you can't afford whale oil except for the lantern. Bring me that lantern. Dying, I shouted. Dying. And in my notes, I just say fucking hilarious. Then, Lestat just goes, it happens to everyone. I don't know, is that even French? Who knows? Then in my notes, I see why I read this as a kid and wanted to be Lestat. I did. I kind of wish my parents didn't let me, like, they were just so impressed with it, like, the level I could, like, read and write and communicate, that they let me read whatever I wanted. And, it resulted in this. Anyway. Yeah, I did want to be Lestat so bad. I share with Anne Rice, like, ever since I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a long-haired man. Like, true. Anyway, then we get to, like, the part, so this is a famous part I've heard a lot of people talk about, where it's like the morning's coming and they only have one coffin, and Lestat says, you'll have to bed down with me this morning. I haven't prepared your coffin. And, in my notes, I say Anne Rice, 2 dudes, 1 bed pioneer, a visionary. She fucking was, all right? So then we get into this whole thing where, like, Louis is like, no, instead of sleeping with you, I'll just sleep in the closet. And I'm just like, gay. Holy shit, okay? Like, we're literally going there. We're literally doing this. Yeah, then we get into, like, this thing where Daniel kind of, like, shuffles he kind of, like, he's like, oh, like, are vampires really afraid of crosses? Like, if I throw, like, 20 Uno cards at you, do you gotta count them? But he just asked about the crosses, and Louis is like, that is how you would say today, bullshit. I really enjoyed that. Like, there's some humor within these books, too. Like, there's some really funny fucking moments, okay? Then, yeah, so the boy laughed despite himself. Then his face grew serious. And then Louis said, you mustn't be so shy with me. And I just wrote, gay. All right. Then we have another one where, like, Louis lights the cigarette for Daniel because his hands are shaking so bad. And I just wrote, gay. Again, like, this kind of book has, like, Lawrence of Arabia vibes. Like, if you mean, in the movie, it's, like, one of the longest movies ever that, like, has genuinely no women in it. Yeah, and it's just really gay. Like, if you've never seen Lawrence of Arabia, I haven't either, but, like, I've been meaning to, but that movie's, like, 10 years long, and I'm just like, bro, all right. Yeah, so here we get, there's still, Louis and Lestat are back to fighting about sleeping arrangements, and, Louis is like, I begged Lestat to let me stay in the closet, but he laughed, astonished. Don't you know what you are? He asked, and, I just have arrow gay. All right. Yeah, then they have, like, it's like a 3-page thing of, like, them just fighting about how they're gonna sleep in the coffin. So now Lestat finally goes, now I'm getting into the coffin, he finally said to me in his most disdainful tone, and you will get on top of me if you know what's good for you. And I did. I lay face down on him, utterly confused by my absence of dread and filled with a distaste for being so close to him, handsome and intriguing though he was. And I just have, how much Louis loves and hates Lestat makes me rock hard. And it do be like that, okay? So then Louis still having his, like, little panics, and Lestat's like, don't worry, you'll be dead when you wake up. Like, as if that would soothe anyone. Yeah, and Louis has this whole thing where he's like, oh, I did not like Lestat at all. You cannot understand. Before I died, Lestat was absolutely the most overwhelming experience I'd ever had. And Louis is like, yeah, now that, like, the gap is closed between us and I was like him, I realized that he just sucks ass. And, it's like Louis will be like, oh, I hated this man so much. Everything about his personality made me want to throw up. But he was so sexy, though. Which, real king. Like, we've all been there. You know what I'm saying? All right. Yeah, then I have just a note at the bottom of this page. Yeah, he, like, compares Lestat to an angel about to give the word of the Lord. And I'm just like, I feel like every time Louis wants to say anything very gay about Lestat, he tries to, like, put some, like, Catholicism in there to, like, red herring it. But I'm like, I see through you. Oh, yeah, then, so this really pissed me off, and again, like, we're getting into the part where I'm like, oh, yeah, I could see why especially a lot of, like, Black American fans of, like, the television show would not want to engage with the source material, all right, and, we get into the part where vampirism cures Louis of his racism. Which is very interesting because that was kind of what the Irish vampire was saying he was gonna do in Sinners. I loved Sinners, honestly, but yeah, so Louis talks about like how like vampirism like clarified his mind and like removed his fear and like removed his emotions, and like he wasn't scared of black people anymore, so he could like see them clearly. And I'm like, okay, so you can like see people clearly, but you're still comfortable having like slaves, all right? So he goes, you know, I had several extremely intelligent slaves who might have done the overseer's job just as well a long time before, if I had recognized their intelligence and not feared their African appearance and manner. Gross. All right. Yeah, then he goes, in my experience, I still thought of them as childlike savages, barely domesticated by slavery. And I was just like, disgusting, but period accurate. Alright, so this is like editing me, right? And I've read that passage a couple times, and like, at least what I'm taking from it is that Louis saying that now that vampirism gave him like the gift of reason and not human emotions, he's no longer terrified of black people, but he still thinks of them as like childlike savages. So ew. This came out in the 70s, like, okay, bye. My notes, I said Lestat really is mother. Yeah, Lestat. So one thing, Louis does not think that Lestat handled his, like, transformation very well, and he was like, Lestat, had he any native intelligence, might have explained things to me patiently and gently, that I had no need to fear the swamps, that snakes and insects. To snakes and insects, I was utterly invulnerable, and that I must concentrate on my new ability to see in total darkness. Instead, he harassed me with condemnations. Yeah, Lestat really is mother, like, classic mom activities. So then basically in this chapter, they're like hunting a camp of slaves to like runaway slaves to like kill and eat, which like, again, like this book really explores like the horror of what these people do, which is like, imagine like you become free from slavery and then like white vampires eat you. Like, yeah, so I was like a white slave owner treating black bodies like meat. He was always a vampire. And like they go through a super graphic and disturbing like attack sequence, like feeding off this camp of slaves. So then we talk about that, and then he kind of talks about like how the complete transformation of like Lestat and like taking his blood, about how like every time he kills, it is again and again a celebration of that experience, because for vampires that is the ultimate experience. Like, so yeah, in my notes I just have life, death, and birth through the blood. Then we just get into like kind of like this whole page of Louis roasting Lestat, and I just put on Lestat has marvelous bitter X energy. So Louis is feeding on one of these poor slaves that they have, and like he says, you know, I was drowsing, falling into weightlessness, and then Lestat pulled me back. He's dead, you idiot, he said with his characteristic charm and tact. You don't drink after they're dead. Understand that. Yeah, I feel like there is like, I don't know what kind of relationship Anne Rice had with like her parents, but like looking specifically as Anne Rice, Adam Lestat as like a parental figure who is unfit to be one. And yeah, like, but again, like, we don't know, because Louis is so bitter and hateful and miserable about genuinely everything on Earth. We don't even know how real this is, which is kind of cool. How much of this do we have left? Okay, I'm on page 31. We're on 28. Yeah, Louis calls, you know, Lestat as the sow's ear of which nothing fine could be made, as boring as a mortal, as trivial and unhappy as a mortal. But like, Louis, you just went through the whole beginning of this chapter saying that like you were so enraptured by your petty issues that you were just a miserable man. Yeah, and then I put in it, I was like, the return of the ego, what a powerful roast. Yeah. So then we get into the boy, you know, when he interjects throughout the thing and like gives opinions, and Louis says to him, do you understand? A big thing is like, Lestat just wants to get Louis' transformation over with. And Louis is like, no, this is like a brilliant and magical, transformative, dark, miserable thing. And I want to like fully experience it and learn all I can about it. And Lestat is like, chop, chop, bitch. But, yeah, Louis tells Daniel, do you understand me when I say I did not wish to rush headlong into experience, that what I'd felt as a vampire was far too powerful to be wasted? And Daniel replies, yes, said the boy eagerly. It sounds as if it was like being in love. The vampire's eyes gleamed. That's correct. It is like love. And in my notes, I say I'm such an evocative and human exploration of the supernatural. Then we have an amazing scene where like Lestat catches a rat and drains its blood out of a glass and like drinks it, which I believe that's also in like, is it in the 91 or the 92 movie that scene's in there? Reading this back, like, so I read these books when I was like a little kid, so I remember some things, and there are certain things that are actually like ringing bells for me, but when comparing it, I think actually that movie is like kind of faithful to the book in a lot of ways that like other adaptations are not. But yeah. So then I have in my notes here Brat Prince realness, and Louis and Lestat have this whole fight where Louis is like, I'll throw your father out of Pointe, and Lestat is like, you won't do it because like I'm withholding information from you and I'm the only one who could teach you. And they just have this just like pure bitchy, like when they fight, it's really funny. Super bitchy, Brat Prince realness for sure. Then we're on page 31. This is the last chapter of chapter 1. So essentially, Lestat expects Louis to like get his own coffin, but like remain in the room with him. Louis pulls his whole coffin into the oratory he had built for his dead brother, and it's just like an incredible gothic scene. Like he hauls his coffin, right? So like embracing my coffin, hoisting it and carrying it down the brick stairs. I could hear the lock snapping on the French doors above, the swoosh of the drapes. The sky was pale but still sprinkled with stars. Like, and the very last line of chapter 1. So actually I'll just read it. The vampire turned to the boy. For the first time now I was fully and completely a vampire. I shut the wood blinds flat upon the small barred windows and bolted the door. Then I climbed into the satin-lined coffin, barely able to see the gleam of cloth in the darkness, and locked myself in. This is how I became a vampire. And on my notes, it's just killer ending line. Like the killer ending line of chapter 1 of all time. Yeah, and that's it. Let me know how you feel about this. I'm gonna keep reading this anyway, but let me know if you like this video, if you fuck with it. I've been trying out some different things, some different formats on my channel, whatever. Like, comment, subscribe. It's so funny that like the "you can sleep on top" is like canonically in the book, and they took it for the TV show. Anyway. Evening Squires, peace out. I just want to show you my coffin nail to celebrate October. And goodbye.